So if that center used to be able to contain a totality, which would be an infinitude, then maybe at every iteration of reality processing, then each one of those would have a center for the entire iteration. But that would only allow for a linear progression of new souls. And I don't think that that's the case, because it should be exponential, especially considering it's fractal. So it should compound. I suppose that's true, though, that there's a center point to everything, meaning, yes, there's a center point to that iteration, but then there's another set of center points in between that center point and the edge points on the surface of that sphere, if you will, or whatever it is. I would assume it would be like a sphere, you know? And when I envision just like the totality of reality, I'm envisioning it as a sphere. I don't know what shape it would be, but it just seems to me that it would be a sphere. So there's a center point to that sphere, but then there's also an infinite number of other center points. So there's like the original center point, and then there's the center point in between that original and the periphery in like a ring around it. Or I guess not even a ring, it would be a sphere, another sphere, but it'd be hollow. So it'd be like, kind of like if you were to put a halfway point in between a line, and then you put a 1/4 and a 3/4, and then you spun it around in 360 degrees, then you'd have that shape. So that, and then there's halfway in between those quarter pieces, and those would be 1/8, and then 1/16, 1/32, blah, 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 blah. And that should saturate the entire, and then there's the compounding. Okay, so that's how all the souls get born. So they start off, well, that obviously they must have to, because the 0th part of every iteration would just be a totality of whatever existed before plus this null set, because it would just contain itself. It's sort of like the start position, but you haven't done anything yet. You're just at the starting position. And like at a race, you haven't started the race yet. You're just at the starting line. So it's like that's the starting line. So the starting line is all these souls get born in the beginning of every iteration. So there it is. That's the accountability I was looking for, the number of souls. So yeah, so then my soul could just as easily be like everyone else's. It's just another soul. It doesn't have to be the center soul. So then why the hell do I have this theory? So that's a whole different, I don't even want to go there. The fact that it begins like that means that from then on, those center points actually get superseded and then shrink because of that saturation as the iteration unfolds. And then as soon as it's done unfolding, then there's the terminus, which is the total collection of all things at the infinite dimension, so that it contains everything at the end and nothing in the beginning. And every single iteration, it just keeps blooming. And that's why it feels like every moment, it's not a static, jarring, jagged feel. It's fluid. It's flowing. Every moment flows or blooms. There's something about that fluidity. Alan Watts said that everything was all wiggly, but I don't believe that. I think that there are sharp edges to things, but those edges are holographic, not substantial. They're perceived, but they're not embedded in reality. They're not real, actual limits. They're just the limits that we put on things so we can label them as whatever they serve as our purpose for us, usually. And then later on, that it serves the purpose of something, but ultimately it always serves ourselves. We can't fool ourselves into thinking that there is such a thing as true nobility, because even the attempt at being noble serves oneself. There is always the serving of oneself, but it's if that serving of oneself comes at the cost of others that it becomes an evil. But everything serves itself. Everything affirms itself. Everything says yes to itself. If it wants to persist, if it says no to itself, it just becomes self-destructive, suicidal, goes back to nothing. You get another variant, and then it invariably must either choose differently or go back to nothing and get recycled, and another one pops out, and what are you going to do? Are you going to do the same thing the last two guys did and blow yourself up, or are you going to live? And eventually the only thing that you've got is a whole bunch of really old survivors and a tiny minority of youngsters that just, came out, some of which might die, but the others will just keep going and going and going and going, and they survive longer and longer and longer, and then end up with everything. Okay. But then at the end of that, then after everything has been completed for that iteration, the next iteration then supersedes it after it finalizes. The very next one caps that, and you start over again. That's amazing. Evolution is infinitely resolute. It means that it's happening not just every second, not just every microsecond, not just every picosecond, but fluidly, infinitely compoundingly. And that means that it could be expanded regardless of the biological limitations. What? Theoretically, Jesus could have physically walked on the water and could have resurrected the dead. And it is also possible to know everything. You just can't grab it. It follows you around. It's like owning an object that's bigger than you are. You have the deed. You know where the address is, and then you can go in there or not. But it isn't yours. It's not something that you own. It's something that you access. And faith is the key. As I say, be careful with that key, Charles.